Picture this, you're scrolling through your feed on a random Wednesday afternoon, your thumb moving on autopilot, your brain barely registering the 1,000th piece of content you consumed today. And then suddenly, bam, you see a thumbnail that stops you dead in your tracks. It's a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing on a street corner with a bundle of flowers in her small hands. But it's not the flowers that grab you, it's her eyes. Those eyes are filled with something you can't quite name at first. Is it fear? Wisdom? Caution? All of the above? The title screams at you in all caps, "Mom told me not to trust you." Now here's the thing that most people don't get about viral content or stories that actually stick with you long after you've watched them. It's never really about the shock value, even though that's what gets you to click. It's about what that shock reveals, what it uncovers about human nature, about the masks we wear, about the distance between who we pretend to be and who we actually are when nobody's keeping score. This isn't just another feel-good story you'll forget by tomorrow morning, and it's definitely not some random encounter that happened to get caught on camera. This is about a moment that changed everything, not just for the people involved, but potentially for anyone who's willing to sit with the discomfort of what it reveals. You know what's absolutely crazy when you really think about it? Most people, and I mean the vast majority of human beings walking this planet right now, would have walked right past that girl. They would have dismissed her words as childish nonsense, maybe smiled politely, maybe felt a twinge of something in their chest, and then continue their day like nothing happened. We've become experts at compartmentalizing, at protecting ourselves from moments that might demand we actually change something fundamental about how we're living. But this poor girl, standing there on that corner with hope flickering in her eyes despite everything life had already thrown at her, and trust me, she'd seen more than most adults ever will. She held up a mirror to someone who thought they had it all figured out. Let me break down why this moment matters more than you might initially think, because there are layers here that go way beyond a simple interaction between a wealthy person and a street vendor. First off, we live in an era of curated perfection, right? Everyone's showing you their highlight reel, their wins, their successes, their life-changing moments that are usually just regular moments with a Valencia filter slapped on them. We've gotten so good at performing our lives that we forgot how to actually live them. We talk about authenticity while reading from scripts. We preach vulnerability while hiding behind carefully constructed personas. We claim to value real connection while swiping left on anything that doesn't immediately gratify us. And into this mess, this beautiful disaster of modern existence, walks a child who doesn't know how to play those games yet, who hasn't learned that you're supposed to smile and nod and pretend everything's fine even when it's clearly not. What makes this moment absolutely life-changing, and I'm using that phrase deliberately, not as clickbait but as an actual description of what happened, isn't the shock value of a child saying something unexpected. It's the raw, unfiltered truth that comes from the most unexpected sources, the places we've been taught to overlook, the people we've been conditioned to see as background noise in our main character storylines. Think about it for a second. Really think about it. When was the last time you genuinely listened to someone society tells you to ignore? When was the last time you let yourself be taught by someone who is nothing you want, nothing you need, nothing that advances your agenda or pads a resume, or makes you look good on social media? We're so caught up in our bubble of success, our carefully curated Instagram lives where everything has to mean something or lead somewhere or prove something, our LinkedIn achievements that measure everything except what actually matters, that we've forgotten how to see what's right in front of us. This girl, this messenger wrapped in innocence and survival, wasn't trying to sell flowers. Okay, technically she was, because that's how she and her mother survive. That's how they keep the lights on and food on the table. That's the daily grind that most of us will never understand because we've never had to choose between eating and electricity. But beneath that surface transaction, she was offering something far more valuable. Something that can't be purchased on Amazon Prime or learned in a masterclass or downloaded as a PDF. She was offering truth, the uncomfortable kind, the kind that makes you squirm and question, and maybe, if you're brave enough, transform. And yeah, I know exactly what you're thinking right now because I can almost hear the skepticism. What could a street vendor possibly teach someone about life? What wisdom could come from someone who hasn't read the right books, doesn't have the credentials, hasn't been featured in Forbes or interviewed on successful podcasts? Everything, my friend. Absolutely everything. Because sometimes, and this is something that every spiritual tradition, every wisdom lineage, every person who's actually done the inner work will tell you, the universe doesn't send you lessons through motivational speakers with million-dollar production budgets or expensive coaching programs that charge 5 figures for access. Sometimes it sends you a child who's seen more of life's darkness before her 10th birthday than most adults ever will in their entire carefully protected existence. Sometimes the teacher shows up as someone who by all conventional measures has failed at life, someone who society has decided doesn't matter, someone who's invisible until they suddenly become unavoidable. And that's when things get interesting, because now you have a choice. Do you dismiss the message because you don't like the messenger? Or do you have enough humility, enough self-awareness, enough genuine desire for growth to recognize wisdom regardless of its packaging? The crazy part, the part that still gives me chills when I think about it, is that the single sentence, "Mom told me not to trust you," wasn't an accusation, at least not in the way we usually understand accusations. It wasn't delivered with venom or anger or the desire to hurt. It was an invitation, a challenge, a moment of pure vulnerability disguised as caution. See, we live in a world where love has become transactional, where we swipe right based on carefully selected photos and witty bios, where relationships are measured in engagement rates and followers, and who brings what value to whom. Trust has become a currency we're afraid to spend, something we hoard and protect and dole out in tiny increments only after someone has proven themselves worthy according to criteria we've never actually examined. Real connection, the kind that doesn't require performance or pretense, the kind that sees you and accepts you and challenges you all at once, that feels like a luxury we can't afford, a risk too great to take in a world that punishes vulnerability. But standing there face to face with someone who had every reason to be cynical, who'd probably been let down more times than she could count, who'd watched people promise help and then disappear, who'd seen the worst of what humans can be to each other, something shifted. The air got heavier, not with tension exactly, but with significance, with the weight of a moment that both people instinctively knew mattered more than the average interaction between strangers. The noise of the city, the cars honking, the people rushing past, the general chaos of urban existence that usually drowns out anything resembling genuine human connection, all of that faded into the background. And suddenly, the only thing that mattered, the only question hanging in the air demanding an answer, was this: are you one of the good ones? Or are you just another person who'll prove my mother right? And honestly, that's where everything begins to unravel, in the best possible way, in the way that feels terrifying and necessary all at once, in the way that marks a clear before and after in someone's life. Because you can't unknow what you know once you've truly seen yourself through someone else's eyes, especially when those eyes belong to someone who has no reason to lie to you, no agenda to advance, nothing to gain from telling you anything other than their truth. The comfortable narratives we tell ourselves about who we are and why we do what we do, those start to crack, and through those cracks, if we're lucky, something more real can finally emerge. Let me paint you the full picture here, because context is absolutely everything when it comes to understanding why this moment mattered so much, why it had the power to shake someone to their core, why it became the catalyst for a transformation that nobody, least of all the person experiencing it, saw coming. The person standing at that flower stand wasn't some random passerby killing time on their lunch break, wasn't a tourist looking for a photo opportunity to post with a heartwarming caption about helping the less fortunate. No, this was someone who'd climbed every ladder society tells us to climb, checked every box marked success in bold letters, achieved everything the self-improvement gurus promise will make you happy, fulfilled, complete. We're talking about years, decades, actually, of grinding, building, networking, strategizing, sacrificing, collecting wins like they were going out of style, like accumulation itself was the point rather than a means to something deeper. On paper, and let's be real, because paper is where most of us measure our lives these days, this person's existence looked like absolute perfection. Multiple businesses thriving in competitive markets, each one a testament to sharp instincts and relentless execution. A bank account that would make most people's eyes water, the kind of financial security where you stop checking prices and start just buying whatever catches your fancy. A network of influential connections, CEOs, politicians, celebrities, the kind of people whose names open doors and green light opportunities before you even finish your pitch. Properties in multiple cities, cars that turn heads, clothes that whisper rather than shout wealth, because when you have real money, you don't need to prove anything to anyone, or so the story goes. Surrounded by people constantly, the calendar packed with meetings and events and social obligations, never a dull moment, never time to be alone with your thoughts for too long. But here's what nobody talks about in those self-improvement podcasts, in those success seminars that charge thousands of dollars for weekend intensives, in those books with titles like The 10X Rule or Crushing It, or whatever the latest promise of optimization happens to be. You can have everything and still feel like you're running on empty. You can check every box and still wake up at 3 in the morning with your chest tight, wondering what the hell the point of all this accumulation actually is. You can be surrounded by people and never feel more alone, more unseen, more like you're performing a role instead of living a life. It's like, and I'm going to use an analogy here that might seem dramatic, but stick with me. It's like being a successful actor who's gotten so good at playing a character that they've forgotten who they actually are underneath the costume. The applause feels hollow. The accolades feel empty. The success feels like a prison decorated with expensive furniture and impressive credentials. The truth is, and this is the part that's hard to admit because it undermines everything we've been told about how life works, success had become a prison. Not the kind with bars you can see, not the kind you can complain about because everyone would just roll their eyes and say, must be nice to have your problems, but a prison nonetheless. Every morning started with the same hollow routine that felt less like living and more like going through motions someone else had choreographed. Wake up at 5:30 because that's what high performers do, right? Check the phone immediately. Emails, messages, market updates, news alerts, the constant influx of information demanding attention and response. Workout, but not because it feels good, because it's another box to check, another way to optimize the machine, another data point to track in whatever app promises to quantify wellness. Shower, dress in clothes that cost more than most people's monthly rent but somehow feel like a uniform, a costume for the character you're playing today. Then the real performance begins. Answering emails with the right tone, strategic but friendly, authoritative but approachable. Meetings where everyone's performing their version of competence and confidence, where vulnerability is weakness and admitting you don't know something is career suicide. Checking metrics obsessively because that's how you know if you're winning. Followers, revenue, growth percentages, market share, all the numbers that supposedly add up to a life well lived. Lunch meetings that are really networking opportunities disguised as casual conversation, where every story you tell and every question you ask is calculated to advance some agenda you've stopped examining. More meetings, more emails, more decisions that affect people's livelihoods and lives but feel abstract, like moving pieces on a chessboard rather than actual human beings with hopes and fears and families depending on them. Maintaining the image becomes a full-time job in itself, posting the right things on social media, not too much but enough to stay relevant, carefully curated glimpses of success that inspire envy disguised as inspiration. Attending the right events, being seen with the right people, saying the right things that signal you're still at the top of your game, still crushing it, still living the dream that everyone else wishes they could achieve. And yeah, there was love in there somewhere, buried under meetings and obligations and the sheer exhaustion of keeping all the plates spinning. Maybe a partner at home who'd signed up for one version of you and gotten a completely different one as success accumulated and consumed everything in its path. Maybe kids who knew your schedule better than they knew your heart, who'd learned that quality time meant you were physically present but mentally somewhere else, checking your phone, thinking about the next deal, the next challenge, the next mountain to climb. But love, real love, the kind that asks you to show up fully and be seen in your messiness and vulnerability, that felt more like a concept than a reality, something other people had in movies or romance novels but not something that fit into a calendar optimized for productivity. You know that feeling when you're in a crowded room, surrounded by laughter and conversation and the buzz of social interaction, but you've never felt more alone, more disconnected, more like an alien observing human behavior from behind glass. That was the daily existence. The secret that success requires you keep because admitting it would shatter the illusion, would reveal that maybe the emperor really doesn't have any clothes, that maybe everything we've been told about what makes life worth living is carefully constructed lie designed to keep us producing and consuming and never actually stopping to ask what we're doing and why. That was the context, the backstory, the setup for why a random encounter with a poor girl selling flowers could land with such devastating impact. Because when you've spent years building walls to protect yourself from feeling too much, from wanting too much, from being too vulnerable to the messiness of genuine human connection, those walls become a fortress that keeps everything out, including the things that actually matter, the experiences that make life feel alive rather than just lived. The girl selling flowers represented something that had been lost along the way, something that got sacrificed on the altar of achievement and ambition, genuine human connection, the kind that doesn't ask for your LinkedIn profile or care about your net worth, or need you to perform or prove anything. The kind that just sees you, really sees you, and offers itself without expectation or agenda. Her mother's warning, don't trust him, wasn't random, wasn't paranoid, wasn't the product of some general distrust of wealthy people or successful individuals. It came from lived experience, from having been there before, from watching people treat her daughter like she was invisible when they were in a hurry, or worse, like she was a problem to be avoided, a guilt trip they didn't sign up for, a reminder of inequality that made them uncomfortable so they'd cross the street or suddenly become very interested in their phones. The warning came from knowing that most people who stop to buy flowers aren't really seeing the person selling them. They're performing generosity, collecting good karma points, making themselves feel better about their privilege by tossing some coins at poverty without actually engaging with a human being on the other end of the transaction. What makes this setup so incredibly powerful, so ripe with potential for transformation, is the contrast between two worlds colliding on a random Tuesday afternoon when neither party expected anything significant to happen. On one side, you've got someone who's mastered the game of accumulation, more money, more influence, more everything the world tells us to chase, but who's forgotten or maybe never learned the language of the heart. Someone who can negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, who can't remember the last time they had a conversation that wasn't about business or strategy or some form of mutual benefit. Someone who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing, to borrow a phrase that's been said before but remains devastatingly accurate. Someone who's won at capitalism's game but lost something essential in the process, something they might not even realize is missing until someone points it out. On the other side, there's this kid who owns nothing by society's standards, no property, no investments, no college fund, no safety net, no plan B if plan A doesn't work out. But she understands everything about survival in its rawest form, about hope that persists even when circumstances provide zero rational justification for optimism, about reading people's intentions because that skill isn't optional when your well-being depends on correctly assessing whether someone's safe or dangerous, trustworthy or exploitative. She's developed emotional intelligence not through some expensive workshop or coaching program, but through necessity, through daily interactions where getting it wrong could mean the difference between eating that night or going hungry, between safety and danger, between kindness and cruelty. Her mom had probably seen it all over the years of doing whatever it took to provide for her daughter, the fake sympathy that evaporates the moment you ask for actual help rather than spare change. The performative charity where people want to feel good about themselves without actually engaging with the systemic issues that create poverty in the first place. The photographers who ask to take pictures with her daughter, who promise the photos will raise awareness or help your situation, and then never follow through, never check back, never translate that awareness into anything tangible. The people who give $1 and expect profound gratitude, who want her daughter to perform the role of grateful poor person, thankful for scraps from tables overflowing with abundance. The business people who'd occasionally stop, ask about their story with what seemed like genuine interest, maybe even promise to help connect them with resources or opportunities, and then disappear completely, ghosts who haunted with their broken promises. So when her mother told her, don't trust them, especially this particular person standing at the flower stand that day, she wasn't being cynical for the sake of cynicism or paranoid without cause. She was being a mother, doing what mothers do when they've been burned before and refuse to let their children touch the same hot stove. She was protecting her child with the only shield she had, wisdom born from disappointment, caution earned through experience, boundaries built from necessity. It was love, really, disguised as warning, wrapped in the kind of protective instinct that kicks in when you've watched the world be cruel to the person you die to protect. And somehow in that brief exchange, in that moment when those words hung in the air between the wealthy man and the poor girl, Mom told me not to trust you. Two strangers standing on opposite sides of every divide society creates were about to teach each other what neither had learned from books, mentors, therapists, or life's usual lessons. They were about to discover that sometimes the universe doesn't give you what you want. It gives you exactly what you need, delivered in the package you least expect, at the moment you're finally ready to receive it, even if you don't know it yet. Here's where the story takes a turn that nobody saw coming. With a plot twist isn't some manufactured drama for entertainment value, but a genuine collision between past and present, between choices made and consequences finally arriving to collect what's owed. What seemed like a simple warning from a protective mother, don't trust him, was actually the tip of an iceberg that had been frozen beneath the surface for years, maybe a decade or more, preserved in the cold waters of unresolved history and abandoned promises. The man standing at that flower stand wasn't just any successful person navigating another day of abundance and opportunity. No, this was someone extraordinarily wealthy, the kind of rich that makes headlines when they donate to causes or launch new ventures, the kind that opens doors before you even knock because your name carries weight, the kind where people adjust their behavior in your presence without you having to say a word because power and money create their own gravitational field. When those words hit him, Mom told me not to trust you, spoken in that innocent, matter-of-fact way that children deliver truth bombs before they learn that some truths are supposed to stay buried, his entire body language shifted in a way that was impossible to miss. The confident posture that comes from years of winning, from always being the smartest person in the room, from never having to worry about being rejected or dismissed, that crumbled like a sandcastle hit by a wave. The polished smile, The one he perfected for business meetings and social events, the one that never quite reached his eyes but convinced most people he was engaged and present, that disappeared completely, replaced by something raw and unguarded. What remained was pure shock mixed with something that looked a lot like recognition, like a man seeing a ghost he thought he'd successfully outrun, like someone watching their carefully constructed present collide with a past they'd worked hard to forget. You know that feeling when your past catches up with you in the most unexpected moment, when you think you've moved on and reinvented yourself and left certain chapters closed. And then, boom, the universe says, "Not so fast, we have some unfinished business to address." Yeah, that's exactly what was happening right there on that street corner. This poor girl, innocent in the way children are before life teaches them to calculate every word and manage every interaction, unaware of the full weight of her mother's words or the history they carried, had just dropped a bomb that exploded a carefully buried chapter of this man's life. The kind of chapter we all have if we're honest, the moments we're not proud of, the decisions we'd make differently if we could go back, the people we hurt through action or inaction and then convinced ourselves had probably moved on, had probably forgotten, had probably forgiven us without us ever having to face them and account for what we did or didn't do. The girl, sensing his reaction, and kids are incredibly perceptive when it comes to reading emotional shifts in adults, they haven't learned to ignore their instincts yet, did something remarkable instead of what most people would do in that situation. She didn't run, didn't apologize for making him uncomfortable, didn't back down or soften her words or try to make the moment easier for him. Instead, with the kind of brutal honesty only children possess before the world teaches them to lie for the sake of social comfort and keeping the peace, she started explaining. Not accusing exactly, not attacking, just sharing information the way you might share any other fact about your life. "My mom says she knew you a long time ago," she began, her voice steady but cautious, the way you'd approach a dog you're not sure is friendly or dangerous. "She says you were different then, or maybe she thought you were different. I don't really understand that part because I wasn't born yet." She paused, looking down at the flowers in her hands, arranging them in a way that seemed more like nervous fidgeting than actual work, before continuing. "Mom says you made her a promise, something about helping our family, about being there when things got bad. She told me you said she mattered to you, that you'd always look out for her, that success wouldn't change who you were at your core." The words hung there, each one landing like a small stone being dropped into still water, creating ripples that spread outward. "But when she needed you most," and here the girl's voice got quieter, more hesitant, like she knew these words carried weight she couldn't fully understand. "When I was just a baby and we had nothing, not even hope," that's how she says it, "not even hope, you were gone. Just, like you'd never existed, like those promises were just words you said because they sounded nice at the time but didn't mean anything when it actually mattered." The air got thick with tension, the kind you could cut with a knife, the kind that makes bystanders instinctively move away because something heavy is happening and they don't want to get caught in the blast radius. This wasn't about a random encounter anymore. It wasn't about a wealthy person having an awkward moment with a street vendor that they'd laugh about later over drinks with friends who'd never understand the complexity of it. This was about unfinished business, about the ghosts we think we've outrun until they show up in the eyes of a child selling flowers, and the truth spoken without malice but with the accuracy of a sniper's bullet finding its target. The man's success, his empire built on strategic thinking and calculated risks and knowing when to advance and when to retreat, his carefully constructed life where every variable was controlled and every outcome was predicted. All of it suddenly felt like it was built on sand, and the tide was coming in fast, threatening to wash away the foundation and expose what was really underneath all that impressive architecture. What makes this moment absolutely life-changing? What transforms it from just another story about someone's past catching up with them into something universally resonant is how it forced a confrontation with consequences that have been ignored, rationalized, buried, and forgotten for years. See, we love to talk about self-improvement like it's all forward motion, become better, earn more, achieve higher, optimize every aspect of your life, biohack your way to peak performance. We consume content about morning routines and productivity systems and mindset shifts and goal-setting frameworks. We read books like Think and Grow Rich and The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and Atomic Habits, and we focus obsessively on accumulation and advancement. But we rarely discuss the debris we leave behind on that climb to the top, the people we step over or step on, the relationships we sacrifice, the promises we break, the versions of ourselves we abandon, because they don't serve the new identity we're trying to construct. Nobody talks about the cost of success when the price is paid by other people, when our wins create someone else's losses, when our convenience creates someone else's catastrophe. We don't want to think about that because it complicates the narrative, makes us less heroic in our own story, introduces shades of gray into what we prefer to see as black and white. The girl continued, not with anger exactly. She was too young to carry that kind of bitter resentment. And besides, this wasn't her wound, it was her mother's, but with a kind of matter-of-fact sadness that was somehow more devastating than rage would have been. Mom never told me the full story, she admitted, looking up at him now, her eyes searching his face for something. Maybe recognition, maybe remorse, maybe just acknowledgement that what she was saying was true. She just said that you were someone who could have changed everything for us, but chose not to. She said you had the power to help, the resources, the connections, all of it, but when she reached out, when she really needed you, you didn't answer her calls, didn't respond to her messages, just disappeared like she meant nothing. The girl shifted the flowers from one hand to the other, a gesture so casual it created this jarring contrast with the weight of what she was saying. She told me I should be careful around people like you, people who make the world believe they're good, who probably even believe it themselves, but who forget about promises when keeping them becomes inconvenient or complicated or threatens the new life they're building. That wasn't just an observation from a child reporting what her mother had said. That was a mirror being held up to show this man exactly who he became when nobody was watching, when his choices didn't have to be explained or justified, when the only person he had to answer to was himself, and he'd apparently decided that some people's pain was an acceptable price for his peace of mind. The wealthy man stood there, probably running through memories he'd locked away in compartments labeled past mistakes, or youthful indiscretion, or whatever language we use to minimize the impact of our choices on other people's lives. Justifications he'd rehearsed probably started flooding in. I was young. I was building my career. I couldn't afford to be dragged down. She would have understood if she'd known the pressure I was under. I sent money once, didn't I? All the excuses we construct to protect ourselves from the uncomfortable truth that sometimes we're the villain in someone else's story, that sometimes our success story has casualties we prefer not to count. The thing about consequences is that they don't care about your justifications or your rationalizations or how far you've come since then. They show up anyway, demanding acknowledgement, insisting on being seen. But here's what makes this particular moment cut so deep, what makes it impossible to dismiss or minimize. None of that mattered now. Not the excuses, not the justifications, not the careful story he'd probably told himself 1,000 times about why he did what he did and how it all worked out for the best in the end. Because standing in front of him was living, breathing proof that our choices ripple far beyond what we can see, that what we do, and equally important, what we fail to do, creates waves that crash into other people's shores, sometimes destroying what little they'd managed to build. And sometimes those ripples come back as waves, as tsunamis actually, that demand we finally face what we've been running from all along, that insist we account for the distance between who we claim to be and who we actually are when the cameras are off and nobody's keeping score. The girl wasn't finished, though. She had more to say, more truth to deliver on her mother's behalf, and something about this moment had given her permission to speak freely in a way she probably rarely got to do. Mom said that you used to talk about hope all the time, about making the world better, about how success meant nothing if you couldn't lift others up with you. She said that's what made her trust you in the first place. You seemed different from the other people who had money, like you actually saw her as a person instead of just, I don't know, whatever rich people see when they look at people like us. Kids have this way of cutting through bullshit that adults spend lifetimes learning to navigate around, and this girl was no exception. But she said that success changed you. Or maybe it just revealed who you always were underneath the nice words. She said you got so focused on protecting what you built that you forgot about the people who believed in you before you had anything worth protecting. The truth in those words landed like punches, systematic and precise, each one finding a vulnerable spot that the armor of wealth and achievement couldn't protect. Because what's the point of all that success, all that accumulation, all those wins and milestones and achievements, if you have to become someone you wouldn't respect in order to get there? What's it worth if the price is your integrity, your compassion, your ability to honor commitments to people who can't offer you anything in return except their trust and their hope that you're different from everyone else who's let them down? The man was experiencing something that wealth usually insulates you from, genuine accountability from someone who had nothing to gain from softening the blow, who wasn't trying to network or impress or get something out of the interaction, who was just telling the truth as she understood it, as her mother had lived it, as their life had been shaped by his absence when his presence had been promised. And maybe the most devastating part of all, the detail that would haunt him in quiet moments for years to come, was that the girl didn't hate him. She didn't spit his name like a curse or treat him with a contempt that might have been easier to dismiss as unfair or exaggerated. She just looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution, trying to reconcile the monster her mother's stories had created with the actual human standing in front of her, clearly shaken, clearly affected, clearly not the heartless villain that would make the narrative simpler. Because humans are complicated, and sometimes the people who hurt us most aren't evil. They're just weak or scared or so focused on their own survival and advancement that they become blind to the casualties their choices create. And somehow, that's almost worse than malice, isn't it? That someone could damage your life not because they hated you, but because they simply didn't think about you at all. Because you became an inconvenience to be avoided rather than a person to be honored. Because their ambition erased their empathy and left nothing but the shell of who they'd promised to be. What happened next is the kind of resolution that doesn't come with a neat bow or a Hollywood ending where violins play and everyone hugs and the credits roll with that warm feeling that everything's been fixed. But it's real, and that's what makes it powerful. It's messy and uncomfortable and ongoing, because real transformation isn't a moment. It's a process that unfolds over time with setbacks and breakthroughs and everything in between. The wealthy man didn't immediately throw money at the situation or try to buy his way out of the discomfort, and honestly, that would have been the easiest route, right? Write a check with enough zeros to make the guilt go away. Set up a trust fund. Make a grand gesture that looks impressive to outsiders but doesn't actually require any real vulnerability or change. That's what wealth teaches you to do. Solve problems with resources. Keep everything at arm's length. Maintain control by controlling the transaction. But something about this moment, something about looking into that girl's eyes and hearing his own broken promises reflected back at him through her mother's words, short-circuited that instinct. Instead, he did something that success rarely teaches us to do. Something that goes against every impulse we develop when we're climbing ladders and building empires and protecting what we've accumulated. He asked to meet the mother. Not to explain himself, not to justify his past actions with a kind of polished presentation he'd given a boardroom, not to negotiate terms or manage the situation or control the narrative. Just to listen. To sit in the discomfort of facing someone he'd wronged, someone whose trust he'd violated, someone whose life had been fundamentally harder because of choices he'd made or failed to make. And let me tell you, that ask took more courage than any business risk he'd ever taken, because business risks have calculable outcomes and worst-case scenarios you can plan for. This was walking into emotional territory with no roadmap, no strategy, no way to predict or control how it would unfold. When that meeting finally happened, after several days of the mother deciding whether she even wanted to open this door, whether revisiting this pain was worth whatever closure or resolution might come from it, it was awkward as hell. Not the kind of awkward where you laugh nervously and move on, but the deep, visceral awkwardness that comes when two people who once shared something, hope, maybe even love, definitely trust, now sit across from each other with years of resentment and abandonment between them like an ocean neither knows how to cross. They met at a small cafe, neutral territory, the kind of place where neither had history or advantage. She arrived late, probably having changed her mind a dozen times on the way. Probably walked past the cafe twice before finally forcing herself to go inside. He was already there, looking more nervous than he had before any business negotiation, any investor pitch, any moment in his professional life, because those moments he could prepare for with data and projections and carefully rehearsed talking points. The first 20 minutes were almost unbearable. Stilted small talk, careful questions that danced around the real conversation, both of them trying to figure out how to bridge a gap that felt impossibly wide. She ordered coffee she didn't drink, just held the cup like it was something to do with her hands. He kept starting sentences and not finishing them, realizing that nothing he prepared to say actually addressed what needed to be said. But then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion with the performance. Maybe it was the realization that there was no way to do this gracefully, so they might as well do it honestly. Maybe it was just that the pain had been buried so long that once the door opened even a crack, everything came flooding out. The mother didn't hold back. She laid out every struggle. Every night she cried wondering how to feed her daughter. Every moment she felt betrayed by someone she thought would be different from all the other people who'd made promises they never intended to keep. She talked about the specific moments when she'd reached out, not asking for a handout, not begging, but asking for the help he'd promised, the support he'd sworn would always be there. She described calling his office and being told he was unavailable, leaving messages that were never returned, sending emails that disappeared into a void. She talked about the desperate months after her daughter was born, when she was working 3 jobs and still couldn't make rent, when she swallowed her pride and tried one more time to contact him, only to be met with silence or, worse, a polite assistant explaining that Mr. So-and-so had moved on to new ventures and couldn't be reached. The humiliation of that, the special kind of pain that comes not just from being abandoned but from being erased, treated like you never mattered, like the promises made were just sound that filled space and conversations that meant nothing. She talked about having to explain to her daughter, as she got old enough to ask questions, why they lived the way they did when her mother was smart and capable and worked harder than anyone she knew. How do you tell a child that the world isn't fair, that sometimes people who have everything choose to do nothing, that kindness is often conditional and trust is a currency that can be devalued overnight? She described the specific moments of struggle that could have been different, the time her daughter got sick and she couldn't afford the medicine, so she'd chosen the cheaper option that didn't work as well but was what her budget allowed. The time she had to say no to school field trips because the cost, however small, was money she needed for food. The birthday parties her daughter couldn't attend because she had no gift to bring and wouldn't show up empty-handed. All the small ways poverty chips away at dignity, at possibility, at hope, until you're just surviving rather than living, just getting through each day rather than building toward anything better. And he listened, really listened, perhaps for the first time in decades without his phone buzzing, or his mind calculating the next business move, or that voice in his head managing his response and protecting his ego. He didn't interrupt with explanations or justifications. He didn't try to minimize her pain or reframe the narrative in a way that made him look less culpable. He just sat there and absorbed the full weight of what his absence had meant, what his broken promises had cost, what his choice to protect his own comfort and convenience had created in someone else's life. There were tears, his surprisingly, not just hers. The kind of tears that come when you finally stop running from something you've been avoiding for so long that you'd almost convinced yourself it wasn't real, wasn't important, wasn't your responsibility to address. Here's where the story gets life-changing in a way that actually matters, not in the Instagram caption way where everything's a lesson and every hardship is just fuel for your comeback story, but in the real, transformative sense where something fundamental shifts in how you understand yourself and your place in the world. The resolution wasn't about fixing the past, because you can't unbreak what's been shattered for years. Can't undo the struggles and the pain and the nights of crying and wondering why you weren't worth keeping promises to. Time doesn't work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But what emerged from that painful, honest conversation was something unexpected, something neither of them had anticipated when they agreed to meet. Accountability paired with action. Not performative accountability, not the kind where you apologize beautifully and then go back to your life unchanged, but the kind that demands you actually show up differently going forward, that requires you to transform understanding into behavior, knowledge into practice. The man didn't just apologize, though he did that too, a real apology, not the kind that's really about making the apologizer feel better or managing their reputation, but the kind that acknowledges specific harm and takes full responsibility without caveat or excuse. I was wrong, he said, and those 3 words, simple as they are, felt monumental because people at his level of success rarely admit wrongness about anything. I made promises I didn't keep. I let my ambition and my fear and my selfishness matter more than my integrity. I convinced myself I'd moved on, that the past was past, but I just abandoned someone who trusted me when trust was probably the most valuable thing she had to give. And I'm sorry, not because saying it fixes anything, but because you deserve to hear it, and I need to say it, and the truth needs to be spoken even though it comes years too late to change what you went through. But here's what made it different from the countless other times wealthy people apologize for their past behaviors and everyone applauds their growth while nothing actually changes. He showed up. Not just emotionally in that one conversation, but practically, consistently, over time. He started coming by regularly, not as a savior swooping in to rescue the poor with his abundance, not as a hero looking for redemption through charity, but as someone genuinely trying to understand the impact of his choices and to honor, however belatedly, the commitments he should have kept all along. He helped the mother set up a proper flower business, not in a flashy, look-at-me-being-charitable way that gets featured in magazines and gives you good PR, but quietly, practically, the kind of help that actually changes circumstances rather than just making the helper feel good about themselves. They worked together to find a good location with actual foot traffic, to secure the permits and licenses that seemed designed to keep poor people from accessing legitimate business opportunities, to source flowers from reliable suppliers who wouldn't price gouge or deliver wilted inventory because they assumed she wouldn't complain. He connected her with an accountant who helped her understand taxes and business expenses and how to actually build something sustainable rather than just surviving day to day. He helped her daughter enroll in a better school, not by throwing money at a private institution, but by navigating the bureaucracy of school transfers and advocating with administrators in the way that people listen to when you have resources and education and confidence that you deserve to be heard. The kind of advocacy that shouldn't be necessary, but is, because systems are designed to respond to power and too often ignore need. The poor girl watched this unfold with a mixture of caution and curiosity, the caution of someone who'd been taught early that trust is dangerous, that people disappoint you, that promises are just words that evaporate when tested by reality. But also curiosity, the kind that comes from wondering if maybe the world is more complex than her experience had taught her, if maybe people actually can change, if maybe someone who'd caused so much pain could become someone worthy of trust. Could people really change? Could someone who demonstrated through action that you didn't matter suddenly decide you did? Could transformation happen not just in inspiring stories, but in real life, with all its messiness and complications and backsliding? The answer, it turned out, wasn't simple or immediate, wasn't the kind of thing you could declare with certainty after a week or even a month. But it was being written in real time through consistent action, not empty words or grand gestures, but daily choices to show up, to follow through, to honor commitments, to be present even when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable or demanded something from him beyond money. There were setbacks, of course, because real change isn't linear, and people don't transform overnight into perfect versions of themselves just because they had a wake-up call. Times when he'd slip back into old patterns, missing a meeting because something more important came up, making promises before checking his calendar, and then having to reschedule, approaching their interactions with the efficiency mindset of a business transaction rather than the presence required for genuine relationship. And the mother would call him on it, not with cruelty but with honesty, reminding him that consistency matters, that trust is built through reliability, that good intentions mean nothing if they're not backed up by action. And to his credit, he'd listen, adjust, show up better the next time. Not perfectly, nobody does this perfectly, but genuinely with the kind of commitment that comes from understanding that some debts can't be paid off with a single check but require ongoing investment of time, attention, presence, care. But here's the deeper lesson that rippled out from this encounter, the part that transforms this from just a story about one man's redemption into something universally applicable, something that touches anyone who's ever had to confront the distance between who they think they are and who their actions prove them to be. We all carry unfinished business. Every single one of us, no exceptions. Broken promises we've made to ourselves or others. Moments where we chose convenience over character, comfort over integrity, self-protection over showing up for someone who needed us. People we've hurt through action or inaction, through what we did or failed to do, through the ways we were too caught up in our own drama to notice their pain. Relationships we've neglected, opportunities we've squandered to be better than we were, moments when we had the chance to choose love and chose fear instead. Here's where the story gets life-changing in a way that actually matters, not in the Instagram caption way where everything's a lesson and every hardship is just fuel for your comeback story, but in the real, transformative sense where something fundamental shifts in how you understand yourself and your place in the world. The resolution wasn't about fixing the past, because you can't unbreak what's been shattered for years. Can't undo the struggles and the pain and the nights of crying and wondering why you weren't worth keeping promises to. Time doesn't work that way, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But what emerged from that painful, honest conversation was something unexpected, something neither of them had anticipated when they agreed to meet. Accountability paired with action. Not performative accountability, not the kind where you apologize beautifully and then go back to your life unchanged, but the kind that demands you actually show up differently going forward, that requires you to transform understanding into behavior, knowledge into practice. The man didn't just apologize, though he did that too, a real apology, not the kind that's really about making the apologizer feel better or managing their reputation, but the kind that acknowledges specific harm and takes full responsibility without caveat or excuse. I was wrong, he said, and those 3 words, simple as they are, felt monumental because people at his level of success rarely admit wrongness about anything. I made promises I didn't keep. I let my ambition and my fear and my selfishness matter more than my integrity. I convinced myself I'd moved on, that the past was past, but I just abandoned someone who trusted me when trust was probably the most valuable thing she had to give. And I'm sorry, not because saying it fixes anything, but because you deserve to hear it, and I need to say it, and the truth needs to be spoken even though it comes years too late to change what you went through. But here's what made it different from the countless other times wealthy people apologize for their past behaviors and everyone applauds their growth while nothing actually changes. He showed up. Not just emotionally in that one conversation, but practically, consistently, over time. He started coming by regularly, not as a savior swooping in to rescue the poor with his abundance, not as a hero looking for redemption through charity, but as someone genuinely trying to understand the impact of his choices and to honor, however belatedly, the commitments he should have kept all along. He helped the mother set up a proper flower business, not in a flashy, look-at-me-being-charitable way that gets featured in magazines and gives you good PR, but quietly, practically, the kind of help that actually changes circumstances rather than just making the helper feel good about themselves. They worked together to find a good location with actual foot traffic, to secure the permits and licenses that seemed designed to keep poor people from accessing legitimate business opportunities, to source flowers from reliable suppliers who wouldn't price gouge or deliver wilted inventory because they assumed she wouldn't complain. He connected her with an accountant who helped her understand taxes and business expenses and how to actually build something sustainable rather than just surviving day to day. He helped her daughter enroll in a better school, not by throwing money at a private institution, but by navigating the bureaucracy of school transfers and advocating with administrators in the way that people listen to when you have resources and education and confidence that you deserve to be heard. The kind of advocacy that shouldn't be necessary, but is, because systems are designed to respond to power and too often ignore need. The poor girl watched this unfold with a mixture of caution and curiosity, the caution of someone who'd been taught early that trust is dangerous, that people disappoint you, that promises are just words that evaporate when tested by reality. But also curiosity, the kind that comes from wondering if maybe the world is more complex than her experience had taught her, if maybe people actually can change, if maybe someone who'd caused so much pain could become someone worthy of trust. Could people really change? Could someone who demonstrated through action that you didn't matter suddenly decide you did? Could transformation happen not just in inspiring stories, but in real life, with all its messiness and complications and backsliding? The answer, it turned out, wasn't simple or immediate, wasn't the kind of thing you could declare with certainty after a week or even a month. But it was being written in real time through consistent action, not empty words or grand gestures, but daily choices to show up, to follow through, to honor commitments, to be present even when it was inconvenient or uncomfortable or demanded something from him beyond money. There were setbacks, of course, because real change isn't linear, and people don't transform overnight into perfect versions of themselves just because they had a wake-up call. Times when he'd slip back into old patterns, missing a meeting because something more important came up, making promises before checking his calendar, and then having to reschedule, approaching their interactions with the efficiency mindset of a business transaction rather than the presence required for genuine relationship. And the mother would call him on it, not with cruelty but with honesty, reminding him that consistency matters, that trust is built through reliability, that good intentions mean nothing if they're not backed up by action. And to his credit, he'd listen, adjust, show up better the next time. Not perfectly, nobody does this perfectly, but genuinely with the kind of commitment that comes from understanding that some debts can't be paid off with a single check but require ongoing investment of time, attention, presence, care. But here's the deeper lesson that rippled out from this encounter, the part that transforms this from just a story about one man's redemption into something universally applicable. Something that touches anyone who's ever had to confront the distance between who they think they are and who their actions prove them to be. We all carry unfinished business. Every single one of us, no exceptions. Broken promises we've made to ourselves or others. Moments where we chose convenience over character, comfort over integrity, self-protection over showing up for someone who needed us. People we've hurt through action or inaction, through what we did or failed to do, through the ways we were too caught up in our own drama to notice their pain. Relationships we've neglected, opportunities we've squandered to be better than we were, moments when we had the chance to choose love and chose fear instead. The difference between staying stuck in that pattern, endlessly repeating the same mistakes while telling ourselves sophisticated stories about why we are the way we are, and actually evolving into someone we can respect when we're alone with our thoughts at 3 a.m, that difference comes down to whether we're willing to face the uncomfortable truth when it shows up. Even if, especially if, it arrives in the form of a child selling flowers who whispers words we'd rather not hear, who holds up a mirror we'd prefer to avoid, who represents consequences we thought we'd outrun. This man's wealth couldn't shield him from his past, and that's actually beautiful in a weird way, because it means none of us are beyond the reach of consequences or the possibility of making things right. It means that the universe, life, karma, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't let us off the hook just because we're successful or busy or have convinced ourselves that we've moved on. The flower stand became a symbol in the neighborhood and eventually in how both of them understood their own stories, not of poverty or charity, not of victimhood or heroism, but at the intersection where our choices meet their outcomes, where success gets measured not by what we've accumulated but by how we treat the people who have nothing to offer us in return except their humanity and, if we're lucky and if we earn it through consistent, humble, genuine action, a second chance at becoming who we always claimed to be. The girl still sells flowers, but now from a real store with her mother's name on the sign, a business that's actually thriving, that employs 2 other people from the neighborhood who needed opportunity more than they needed pity. And the man? He still runs his businesses, still makes deals, still accumulates success by society's conventional measures. But something's different now. There's a photo on his desk of him and the girl at the flower shop opening. And unlike most photos in wealthy people's offices that are really about them and their achievements, this one reminds him daily of what actually matters, of the difference between success that's hollow and success that's meaningful, of the distance he once let grow between his values and his actions, and his ongoing commitment to close that gap. He volunteers at the shop sometimes, not for photo opportunities or tax write-offs, but because genuine relationship has developed, because the girl and her mother have become actual people in his life rather than abstractions or casualties of his ambition. Because transformation, real transformation, doesn't happen in isolation, it happens in relationship, through the mirror of how we impact others, through the daily practice of choosing differently than we did yesterday. And maybe that's the point of all this, the lesson embedded in this unlikely encounter between a powerful man and a powerless girl, between past and present, between who we've been and who we might still become. Hope isn't just some abstract concept we talk about in inspirational posts or motivational speeches. Hope is what emerges when someone actually does the hard work of change, when promises are kept instead of broken, when power is used to lift others rather than protect privilege, when success becomes a tool for connection rather than a wall that separates us from the messy, beautiful, essential work of being human with other humans. The poor girl who once whispered, "Mom told me not to trust you," now sometimes calls him by his first name, sometimes asks for advice on her homework, sometimes shares her dreams about what she wants to be when she grows up. Dreams that are bigger now, because possibility has entered her life through the door of someone else's genuine transformation. And isn't that what we're all really searching for underneath the self-improvement and the success and the endless optimization? The knowledge that we can change, that our past doesn't have to determine our future, that broken trust can be rebuilt through consistent action, that it's never too late to honor who we said we'd be. That love and hope aren't just concepts but practices we can choose daily regardless of how far we've strayed from them before. That maybe, just maybe, the universe gives us exactly the teachers we need, even when they arrive as children selling flowers who see through our carefully constructed facades straight into the truth of who we are, who we might still become if we're brave enough to stop running and finally face what we've been avoiding all along. This isn't another feel-good story about charity or some wealthy person discovering their conscience after a convenient encounter. This is about a collision between past and present that nobody saw coming, about broken promises that don't stay buried just because you've gotten rich enough to pretend they never existed, about a child who holds more wisdom in her caution than most adults carry in their entire carefully curated lives. Because here's what's controversial but true. Most of us are walking around performing success while betraying the very values we post about on social media, making promises we never intend to keep, treating people like they're disposable when they can't offer us anything that advances our agenda. And we've gotten so good at lying to ourselves that we actually believe our own stories, until one day someone looks you in the eye and whispers the truth you've been running from, and suddenly there's nowhere left to hide. The girl's mother told her not to trust him, not because she was paranoid or bitter or couldn't let go of the past, but because she'd lived through his betrayal, had survived his broken promises, had rebuilt her life from the ashes of his abandonment. And now, years later, he's standing at her flower stand, successful beyond measure, completely unprepared for the reckoning that's about to unfold. What happens next isn't just their story. It's a mirror for anyone who's ever chosen ambition over integrity, convenience over character, self-protection over showing up for someone who needed them. So if you're ready to confront some uncomfortable truths about success and what it actually costs, if you're willing to question whether you're building a life worth living or just accumulating achievements that mean nothing when you're alone with your thoughts at 3 a.m, then keep watching. Because by the end of this story, you'll either recognize yourself in the painful parts and choose to do something about it, or you'll close this video and go back to pretending that success without character is something worth pursuing. The choice, as always, is yours.